Everyone, I'm Amy Bloom, Executive Director for the National Council of Jewish Women in Miami. Oh, we're still admitting people. Admit all. Admit all. All right, fabulous. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. Thanks everyone for being on our call. This is our third deep dive with our Justice Warriors. We're so grateful that Ida's with us tonight and that she is bringing Antonio to join us as well. And I'm going to turn it over to Mara Leventhal, who is on our board of directors, who's going to be facilitating for us this evening. Mara, if you would take it away. Thank you so much.
Sure. Hello, I'm so honored to be in the company of our wonderful Justice Warriors and everyone who's joining us tonight. As Amy said, I'm on the board. This is my first year on the board of NCJW, and I'm excited and proud to be a part of it. Tonight, I'm very excited to learn more about what the Florida Immigrant Coalition and the Farmworker Association of Florida are doing. And, you know, obviously immigration is an important topic for NCJW nationally and locally. It's one of our pillars. And, you know, anyone who's familiar with Judaism knows that I think there's something like 36 times in the Torah that commands us to be kind and to be welcoming to the stranger in our midst. And you know, we know from the Passover story that we've all been immigrants. We've all spent a history of the Jewish people is filled with times of displacement, and the Jewish diaspora continues today. So it's an issue that we all have close connections to and are passionate about. I would like to introduce our guest tonight. Ida Eskamani is a phenomenal advocate, grassroots organizer with extensive campaign experience. She is the legislative director for the Florida Immigrant Coalition, and she is I know you'll love her as much as I do. Even over Zoom, you can feel her warmth. She has dual degrees in political science and sociology, as well as a master's in public administration from the University of Central Florida in Orlando. She's spent the last decade working in Florida politics, and she currently works with several progressive organizations in the state, including Florida Immigrant Coalition, facilitating legislative efforts and coalition building on behalf of marginalized communities, and we're just honored to have her. So Ida, I will turn it over to you, and we're just looking forward to learning more about what you're doing and how we can take action to support the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you, Mara and Amy. It's good to see you again, and thank you, everybody. I'm super excited to also have the Farmworkers Association of Florida with us tonight, which we'll be also handing over the mic to them after y'all are done listening to me ramble about just everything we're working on. But it's such a pleasure to be here. I have to say, I'm relatively new to the NCJW world, although y'all are not new to Florida Immigrant Coalition at all, or our work on the ground. But I'm relatively new to y'all, but every time I'm in a space, I feel the warmth, I feel the love, I feel the solidarity, and just so grateful. I think all of us are sitting on a lot of Zooms together throughout the days, but I leave y'all Zooms feeling my heart more full. So I just really appreciate the space. I really appreciate the space y'all create, and thank you for centering our work tonight. We deeply appreciate it. I know last week y'all had Charo Villara, who is such a dear friend of mine and an amazing advocate. So, she's big shoes to fill, but we'll certainly do our best, right? So thank you for those kind introductions as well. So my name is Ida Eskamani, not to be confused with my twin sister and Representative Anna Eskamani as well. And so I, as Mara said, I work legislative affairs for several progressive groups here in Florida, including Florida Immigrant Coalition. And so in this brief time, I want to talk a little bit about the work that we've done, what we are doing right now, and then I'll toss it over to the Farmworkers Association as well to speak to just the incredible work they're doing on the ground in our communities here, during this pandemic in particular. But the work in immigration, in immigrant justice is, as y'all can sense, it's never ending. During this time, it's very, it's hard. It's exhausting work. We get a lot of fuel from injustice and from directly impacted communities. I'm first generation American. My parents are from Iran, and met here in America. And so a lot of this work is also deeply personal for a lot of us because we are also directly impacted, right? But also, immigrants are being used right now as a way to divide people in this country. And that kind of hatred is winning political points, right? And so we are constantly, it's an uphill battle, it feels like, but because of amazing folks like you, centering our communities, we know that we will prevail and that we'll find, justice for all. And so I'm actually going to send in the chat for folks who are on I heard Chara might be, oh my God, Chara's here. Hey, Queen. I'm just going to toss this to you. Okay. So I'm going to send in the chat a document that is very familiar to Charo and probably Antonio and Claudia as well. This is the We Are Florida legislative priorities from this past session, right? So a good chunk of my work is in the Florida legislature, which is essentially a microcosm of anti-immigrant, just monstrous horribleness. These past, particularly, really for, the past 10 years, but particularly the past 2 years have been very aggressive. And so I just shared our legislative agenda just to give you all an idea of the scope of work that we do in the Capitol. So Florida Immigrant Coalition, we ourselves are a coalition, right? We're made up of our member organizations of directly impacted folk and partners. And so I serve our membership. We also facilitate what's called the We Are Florida Coalition. We Are Florida is a coalition of basically every group in the state legislature that focuses on immigration. We all come together and we collaborate our efforts. So it's a long list of amazing partners. It includes the Latina Advocacy Network that Charo leads, of course, Farmworker Association of Florida, but also groups like ACLU, SBLC. We have ADL as a member, the Florida PTA is a member. It's a long list of really amazing partners that really sit on the different intersections of immigrant justice because, like so many of our issues, immigrant justice impacts race, class, of course, ethnicity, gender, all the different intersections of who we are. Immigrants touch that, right? And so we are always finding ourselves sitting in those intersections and embracing that in our work. And so our efforts to protect our communities has to reflect that too, right? And so in our legislative agenda, you'll see that a lot of different bills that we oppose and support. And, they're not all exactly explicitly immigrant. Some are worker rights bills, right? The heat stress effort has been very much one that centers all workers, undocumented Floridians and documented Floridians. When you think about folks who work outdoors, it includes farm workers, construction. We've been building unity among farm workers and organized labor in that fight, right? Because it's a shared struggle. And so that bill is basically literally just to pass basic heat stress protections outdoors. So thinking mandatory shade, mandatory water breaks, mandatory health training so folks can identify, when they are facing some sort of heat stress and they can address it quickly. Very basic protections that we don't have on the ground in our communities. Some of the other things you'll see, right, around education access, language access, right, for kids and also our young adults. Right now, for example, DACA recipients don't have access to Bright Futures. We won in-state tuition here in Florida, a bipartisan victory a few years ago, but students still don't have access to state financial aid. And that's what's been we really want to center this too in our work in the legislature, because historically, the immigrant community has not always been this partisan thing, right? we've been able to win bipartisan victories for immigrants in the legislature. This current place that we are at is, horrifying to say the least. It's tearing families apart. It's putting people deeper in shadows and putting lives on the line. And what's so frustrating is that it hasn't always been like this. And we are seeing more and more sort of silent Republican support in the legislature, I will say, more allies behind the scenes, but so much front facing. It's just the most, horrifying rhetoric you can imagine. And sadly, the votes go with that. So you'll see a lot of really amazing proactive bills that we've put forth. And they never get a hearing. They never get a chance for folks to debate or to vote on, right? So this past legislative session, our biggest fight was E-Verify. If folks don't know what E-Verify is, in its mandatory form, it's an online system that private employers have to use to essentially verify that those folks that they're hiring are documented folks, right? And so, generally speaking, in a perfect world, of course, we want our community to be documented too. But folks are currently suffering a broken immigration system, and that doesn't allow folks to get, walk the path towards citizenship, right? But that does not mean that folks are not worthy, that folks should not feel safe, that folks don't pay taxes, that folks are not essential, right, in our communities. These are our neighbors, our friends, our chosen family. And so E-Verify also is very flawed. It doesn't actually work, is what studies have shown, but it's a very big talking point, a very big anti-immigrant talking point. And it's something that Governor DeSantis had championed for a while. So we had that battle all throughout session. I want to thank folks who were part of that, who came to lobby with us. And in this effort, we actually built a lot of allyship with some non-traditional folks, the business community actually. One of our key partners is the American Business Immigrant Coalition as well. And so we were able to help to water down that bill. So the bill that did ultimately pass is not mandatory E-Verify. It's E-Verify for public employers, but for private employers, they have an option. And so for us, that is, even though it doesn't always feel like it, that was a win for a passage of a bill that is not nearly as harmful as what the sponsors wanted the bill to be, what we've seen across the country. And it was from working with our community and centering what our community sees as the most important needs, as well as building, allyship with some more non-traditional allies. I represent Florida Immigrant Coalition. I also represent groups like New Florida Majority, Organized Florida. I will tell you that corporations are like my enemy number one most of the time. I'm constantly fighting them. We have in the Capitol, a loving relationship too, right? But anytime they see folks like me and Chara walk in the room, they're just like, oh Lord, what are they gonna do, right? But on immigration, we actually come together and work together on issues, right? And so that's also part of organizing, is sometimes you build unlikely allies to fight for your people, right? And so that was a major piece in legislative session, was this. I'm sure folks saw headlines. This was one of the governor's top priorities. But as we know, as COVID has shown, immigrant workers, documented and undocumented, are critical to our economy. They are part of our communities, and they should not be villainized or demonized. They should be supported. And again, folks want, a sheet of paper does not make you American, right? It's not attached to your humanity. And again, it's a broken system folks are suffering from that we want to fix. We'd love to fix, but there's no political will to do that, right? And so that bill was a huge fight this last session. And the bill that ultimately passed is a very watered down version, which we are very grateful for. It took a lot of hard work and a lot of sleepless nights. That bill, though, has not yet been signed by the governor. So essentially, legislative session ended right when COVID was starting to be taken seriously in the state. You could argue it's still not being taken as seriously as it should be, of course. But we sort of went right into legislative session, straight into rapid response COVID mode, right? And so until this week, the governor has not been signing bills into law. And just to give folks, in case folks don't know, right, the legislature passes legislation and they send it to the governor, and the governor ultimately has to sign it, and then it becomes law, right? he can also veto it. He can reject it. And so that bill has not yet been sent to him, so it's not yet law. And my hunch, sadly, as the governor did with the anti-immigrant bill last year, he'll likely want to sign it with a lot of anti-immigrant fanfare and make it this like big press moment. And so we're preparing for that, and also working to educate our community on what this bill does and doesn't do, because E-Verify in itself is a very scary concept for our community. And we're working to make sure our folks understand what this change is. And thankfully, again, it's not mandatory for private employers, but it does have some new things that we want to make sure folks know. And so a big part of my job, right, is sort of suffering in Tallahassee. I'm always grateful for folks to come up and join us, to lobby and advocate alongside our community. It's so important in the work that we do that we center people impacted, right? My job is to be a conduit of folks who are experiencing life as an immigrant every single day. Folks who are not, I've been in this work for a decade, right? My voice is not that important. What's important are the folks that lawmakers don't always hear from, right? And so that is very much sort of where I get my drive, is centering the folks who know what their struggle and their freedom looks like. That's not me to say, right? But if I can help give a megaphone to those folks, that's why I'm here. And so that's the quick kind of session update. And then I'll briefly just talk a little bit about what we're doing now, right, in COVID world. And then I'll toss it to the Farmworker Association of Florida. But again, we kind of ended session right into COVID, right? So typically after legislative session, my workflow is I am doing a lot of debriefs, education events, right, around legislative session and what happened. I'll advise our organizers on local policy, because there is still some work that we can do at the local level to decriminalize our communities, to protect our communities. One of the big campaigns we've always pushed at the state level is driver's license for all, right? Because right now, if you're undocumented, you cannot have a driver's license. But we know in Florida that to go to work, to go to church, take your kids to school, you need a license. And because ICE, Immigrant Customs Enforcement, is so intertwined with our local law enforcement, our communities can't trust law enforcement, and our communities risk their lives driving to work every day because their families could be separated by a broken tail light, right? And so there's a lot of stuff at the state level that is so critical to accomplish that, sadly, because of the current makeup of the legislature, they don't want to give a chance. But at the local level, in our city and county commissions, we can pass things like community IDs. We can pass decriminalizing of driving without a license. There's different local policies that local governments have jurisdiction over that we can put forth to help our communities feel a little bit safer in their homes. So those are some of the different efforts we typically would be really pushing forward off session. But with the pandemic, we have been in full rapid response mode. And so what does that look like? There are things that a lot of y'all, I'm sure, are already a part of, right? Getting folks out of detention centers. We've had some wins there, but at the same time, what ICE has done is, instead of releasing folks, they're relocating people, right? And we've seen a complete lack of transparency, dangerous conditions for folks. And it's really important to understand that immigrant detention it's a civil arrest, in the sense of you've not been convicted or committed a crime. I can go on and on about why prisons, even when you've been convicted, are unjust, right, and dangerous. And I'm sure a lot of folks can understand that. And Valencia will go deep into that with y'all. But immigrant detention, you've literally not been convicted of a crime. So it's such an utter violation of your basic human rights. And now with the pandemic, we've seen really scary rates of infection in these facilities and very little transparency, accountability, or safety. So we've always been working hard to shut down detention facilities. I know that NCJW has been a part of that work, and we're so grateful. We're also seeing, of course, just struggle with immigration enforcement. We've had some wins there, in the sense of ICE suspending their raids of hospitals, which I know is stunning to even think that was a thing. We've seen wins in the sense of access to testing. Early on, Donald Trump said that undocumented immigrants would not be would not be impacted if they should not fear accessing testing, right? We've seen the suspension of the public charge rule when it comes to accessing Medicaid and COVID testing and treatment. And those are wins. We've also seen a lot of exclusion, right? Exclusion from different relief packages, exclusion from unemployment benefits. We've seen, exclusion from language access. There's been such a lack of basic language access when it comes to healthcare and testing and news updates, press conferences by state and local officials. And that's been a big struggle. We were able to get the Department of Health website totally translated in Creole, which was a big win for us as well. But overwhelmingly, it's a fight. It's a total fight for our communities right now. And what's been really, of course, beautiful is to see, so clearly how critical our communities are to our economy, right? To our communities. And so that has been beautiful to also lift up and center. And then meanwhile, while we're here struggling with the pandemic, we're expecting a DACA ruling from the Supreme Court, TPS from the Supreme Court as well. And so, I can tell you working in immigrant justice, it's some of the most exhausting, but also most beautiful, because the people we fight for are just the most incredible, most resilient folk. And again, sitting on the intersections of everything, we always want to center racial justice in our work. And I always have to remind folks often there are Black immigrants, right? And sitting on racial and, racism, xenophobia, all the different intersections of our work, these are the folks that we need to lift up. And I always believe that when we lift up the most marginalized and center those folks, we'll all be free, right? And so that's kind of the mission in our work. And so that's kind of what we've been doing, right? There's ways to get involved. I know that was a lot, and I may have spoken a little bit over, but that's the quick roundup. And then I think next I get to introduce Antonio and Claudia, right? And okay, awesome, Mara, thank you. And then I think we go into questions after that. So to speak more into the work, the beautiful, incredible work they're doing that I sort of alluded to, but I am not on the ground like Antonio and Claudia are. So I'm really excited to pass the mic over to them, representing the Farmworker Association of Florida, with chapters across the state. Y'all, just grateful to work with you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ida. This is going to sound like a Oscar award, because I have to say that first and most I want to thank the Sister Eskamani, because they have been a champion of the Farmworker Association of Florida for quite a while. So we are very thankful with them. But also I remember that NCJW has been also with us when we are doing Sun March in the detention center in Homestead. I know that they are also in this struggle and this fight, and I think that the Jewish community understand very well what is to be migrant, what is to be put down, what it is to be discriminated against. So we feel a lot of support of the Jewish community. Now, I'm going to do a little bit of history, because I remember that over 20 years ago, there was like 8 organizations that we made, and we decided that it was time to create a coalition of immigrant organizations. Another 62 members in the Florida Immigrant Coalition. So it has been a long process, but at the same time, like Ada was saying, it's exhausting, but it's very rewarding. It's very rewarding to do this work, and it has been very intense, like I was already mentioned, because it has been out of proportion, and it has been hard in the last 3 years, because there was a lot of negative sentiments against migrants that many people were hiding. And suddenly after the campaign, I would say that from the campaign, everything start to break down. People really start to take an issue of the people that was unknown, that the people that was different, than the people that do not speak clear English. So it has been very intense the last 3 years. And unfortunately, with COVID-19, instead of, we can say that we have been lucky and we have been very pleased with all the support that we have received, but also it has been very divided. There is a lot of sentiments against the migrants, and that definitely have a toll in the mental health of any immigrants. Now, for farm workers, we have been saying for over 36 years that farm workers are essential. They have been always essential. We need them to feed us because the reality is that many of us do not know how to farm anymore. And they are the barebone of this nation. They have been the barebone of this nation. But like it was said, they do not have the same rights that all the rest of workers. They have been excluded of many of the major legislations to regulate work, like the minimum, the overtime. Any farm worker will have overtime. Just in California was instituted the overtime after 50 hours of work. But in the rest of the nation, there is not that kind of legislation. The other legislation that Ida was mentioned is the heat stress. There is not legislation for heat stress. There is some recommendation from OSHA, but there is no regulation. We recently find out that the journeys from farm workers can be 10, 12 hours a day. And if the grower or the contractor or whoever is managing the crew give them 15 minutes to rest for lunch, that will be okay. There is no law that prevent the employer to keep the workers in the fields all the time. Just 15 minutes of rest, independent, it doesn't matter how long is the journey, it is fine. And we think that it's not. We have actually proof that it's not, because something that the association has done is combine education, advocacy, and also research. We have been doing a lot of research with academic partners, because when we were alone and we were doing advocacy or education with the legislators, because we, as a nonprofit, we can do lobby. It is against the law to do lobby. We used to go to the legislators and the legislators say, well, where is the proof? How you can show that the people is getting sick for pesticide exposure? So very early on, we partner with academic institutions and we start to bring the data that the effects of heat, the effect of pesticide, is real and it's serious. So on the legislation for heat stress, we have a lot of data. We follow the workers with high technology. The workers were ingesting a monitor to take the temperature, the core body temperature while they were working. And we have a lot of data on hydration, on temperatures, and sickness of workers. And that's the tools we are using to create this kind of legislation, and that this legislation passed and is effective. Now, the association have 5 offices in the state. Right now, one of our main concerns is actually our office in Immokalee, because like you probably hear from the news, the Immokalee is becoming a very hot spot for cases. There have been a dramatic increase of cases. And well, that's in part because there's more tests. And that's also thanks to the coalition of Immokalee workers who are part of the Florida Immigrant Coalition. But we also have an office in Homestead, which Claudia is the lead organizer in there. And I'm going to give the microphone to her to add anything into the specific work that the association is doing in that area that is close to you. So you can go ahead, Claudia.
Okay, thank you so much. I am so happy to be part of this call, and I try to give a picture for our community. Uh, like Antonio say about the sun workers, they have a long hours. Like they take a long time to work, but it's not just the time or the hours they work. It is many of the places they have they say like it's not like a piece of worker. It is a different place. They say I'm forgetting in Spanish. Oh my god! And but the thing is, they give it a specific work for a specific time. Like they working by a contract, but it's not. It's by hour. And many of the workers, they have to do faster, or they can go to the restroom, or they can drink water because they have to finish the amount they require them. And this affect them because when they don't drink water, South Miami is very hot. Um, and they don't went to the restroom. They don't go to the bathroom. All the problem is high blood pressure, um, deshydratation, and sorry about
Dehydration.
yes. Um, but other issues is with immigration. Many of them is on risk because they went to work, and some persons taken to work after 2 3 days they fire to them, and they said no, because you don't have documents. I don't pay you. If you come to my home, I call to the police, and uh, some of them have a document. It's just because it is Hispanic. And other issues is like the Save the Center in Homestead. Uh, Many kids, they say, Mom, why here in Homestead has a jail for kids? What they do? Why they separate? And they worry. They pay attention. We think they don't pay attention, but they do it. It is health about the behavior, how they share with others. Someone that don't want to go to school. Now with the COVID, it is many of the workers, they do the work, but they have a less hours. They don't have a protections. They some of them go out to work, but they will come into the house. They don't have a how their families are affected because they maybe close to someone's beyond risk or with COVID. Work together. Some places they can have a space for work, but others it's not. They have to work together. Like if it is packing a plant, it is just the size for one hand to others. It is next to the other one. And well, when we went to Tallahassee to do educators to our representatives, we bring to our community because it's the best way for us to give it the big picture for them. Because some of them tell us, yeah, I went to the farms and that's so good. They have everything. But when we bring the workers, we say, no, it is not true. Because when you go into the places, they fix everything, they put water, sometimes some of them, they don't have documents, they don't work because, they want to have only some particular workers. And well, that's some of the things that we do in Homestead. We have the community garden, and the herbs, ancestral herbs, and everyone are welcome to Homestead to see it for remedies. And well, I don't know if that's my information from Homestead.
Thank you, Claudia. That was wonderful. You really did a beautiful job of painting a picture also of some of those about how you have been able to help organize and share those stories with the legislature and other communities, and I can see why you're good at your job. So thank you for being here. Antonio, did you have anything else to add?
I will add a little bit about what Claudia was saying, because I think that many people don't realize how the agricultural work happen in Florida, because I think many of you saw news of fruit and vegetables being destroyed because nobody wants to buy them. You saw like workers still in the fields, so it's confusing. You say, oh well, there is work or there is no work. What is happening? And I think that there is like at least three systems in Florida. Florida is probably a good microcosmos of what's agriculture in the nation, because in one hand you have a lot of nursery work, that's ornamental plants, flowers, and all these decorative plants that are in the gardens. And just Homestead or the Miami-Dade County has 15,000 of those nurseries in the state. So that's the largest in the state. And there's also a lot in the area of Orlando, in the Orange County. And those operations, they decrease production dramatically, very rapidly, because that was not a priority for many places, no? And many places were closing early, so the ornamental plants were down. And then the food industry started to suffer when restaurants start to close. And there's some productions in Florida that are specific for the restaurants: tomatoes, lettuce, spinach, that are exclusive, well, not exclusively, but mainly for restaurants. And once the restaurants close, that industry collapsed too. Now, many growers send remnants of the production to food banks, but the food banks have a limited capacity. So whatever they were not able to ship, they destroy. And obviously workers start to get unemployed, workers on crops, workers in ornamentals. And finally, there is some crops that are mainly for the supermarket. And those are the ones that you are going to see the workers still harvesting those fruits and vegetables. For example, watermelon, blueberries, sweet corn, those other crops, you are going to see the workers still on the fields. And one of our concerns, like Claudia and Ida mentioned, it's the fact that there was no PPE, personal protective equipment, for those workers.
Mm-hmm.
The other industry that Claudia mentioned was the packing houses. Those packing houses, regardless of what is harvesting, they are concentrated either in Homestead or in Immokalee. Those are the two places where the redistribution of fruits and vegetables happen in Florida. That's the only thing I would add. And again, thank you. I guess we are going to go to the question.
Yes. So I would like to open up to anyone who's on the call for questions. The questions can be to Antonio and Claudia from the Farmworker Association of Florida. It could be to Ida at the Florida Immigrant Coalition, FLIC. And I'm going to try to scan through, and you can raise your hand or unmute yourself if you have any questions. And if you're not, I see some people are not on video, so just unmute and.
I did see Rachel had a couple questions in the chat.
Oh, good. I didn't see that. Thank you.
Great. And Rachel, oh, you're fine, Mara, and it's good to see you, Rachel. Hey, girl, hey. So, I can address the second question around.
Here, wait, can we read it for everyone, if just in case somebody doesn't have access? I'll read it. So,
you're such a good moderator. Thank you, Mara.
So, just in case somebody doesn't see the chat, if you're on your phone or something, Rachel posted a question. What is the biggest concern right now for farm workers during this pandemic? What is the best way to get involved with helping Flick advocate for driver's licenses for all?
Thank you for that, Mara. And thank you, Rachel, for those questions. I will take the second question around driver's license for all. So we're currently not in legislative session, right? So we have a really great bill that we put forth. Actually, the bill we filed this past year, Representative Carlos Guillermo-Smith in Orlando was the House sponsor, and Senator Jose Javier Rodriguez in Miami was the Senate sponsor. Senator David Simmons, who is a Republican in Seminole County, had indicated he wanted to file similar legislation last summer. And so we actually had met with him. We had really pushed him on it. And then he ended up essentially not sort of backtracking, decided he didn't want to do it anymore. Also did not tell anybody he wasn't going to do it anymore, including the House sponsor. And so, you know, welcome to the legislature and welcome to, you know, Republicans scare their own shadows. With that being said, but what's really big, there's a few key stakeholders around the driver's license for all fight. And I can talk about this forever. And I love that I'm not surprised, and I'm sure NCJW has already been involved in this, right? But there will be more ways come next sessions, because this is a long-term fight, right? To secure a driver's license for all. There's a few key things to keep in mind, right? So when you put this fight towards via a public safety narrative, it's much more effective in talking to, you know, the general public about it, right? And also appealing to unlikely allies. The way the current, you know, legislature is made up is that we need Republicans to support us to pass stuff, right? And so we've also seen our opposition put out polling saying that majority of Floridians oppose driver's license expansion and don't think undocumented people should have a license and all this stuff. So part of our effort here is also, it's winning hearts and minds, right? And sadly right now, you know, anti-immigrant rhetoric and policies is winning elections for folks, and there are not consequences for leaders to talk in this way. In fact, you could argue there's rewards, right? So it's an uphill battle for us to get some gains in these type of fights, right? But driver's license for all, you know, we approach it in many angles, the basic humanity of it, right? Of this being a right and folks needing to feel safe going to work. And there's also a safety piece where everyone is trained, insured, licensed. Is the economic piece where it brings down insurance costs and also leads to more cars being purchased, and it's good economic driver, right? When we talk about all of that, we have to develop a coalition behind this, right? And so that includes directly impacted folk, you know, our immigrant communities, but also includes insurance companies, public safety organizations, law enforcement, right? Different elected officials. So when we talk about how we build this campaign, you know, we've been really working hard to build those unlikely allies, the business community, right? And I'll tell you, law enforcement is a big uphill battle in this moment. And sadly, part of it, and I could go on this, like I said, I'm going to wrap this up real quick, but I could talk about this for a long time. But right now, you know, the Florida Sheriff's Association, this is the sort of legislative arm of all Florida sheriffs, right? All 67 counties, their sheriffs are part of this kind of, coalition called the Florida Sheriff's Association. Their leader is the Pinellas County Sheriff, Sheriff Galtieri, who is basically our top anti-immigrant sheriff. He's anti-criminal justice reform. He leads their legislative efforts. And so, you know, lawmakers go to him kind of like, where does sheriff stand on these policy issues, right? And they've just been unapologetically anti-immigrant. They wrote Senate Bill 168, the quote anti-sanctuary city bill. They co-wrote it with Joe Gruters, chair of the Republican Party of Florida. And so these are the things we're up against, right? With that being said, the quick answer to your question of how to engage that fight, definitely helping us win elections is important, pro-immigrant candidates. And I'm not going to speak to party because there are there's some Republicans that behind the scenes were really helpful for us this last session, right? And so we don't want immigration to be a partisan issue, right? Our communities should not be treated as such. But there is a clear line right now, right? But what we have to show is that when you're pro-immigrant, you win. When you're anti-immigrant, you lose. And that also includes in our sheriff races. We're working on sheriff forums and candidate questionnaires that emphasize immigration issues as well as criminal justice issues. And really, we call it crimmigration, right? Because those intersections are very clear. So I would say volunteering with our efforts to get people out to vote, supporting those efforts. But also, if you are, if you know folks in the insurance industry, in the car, industry, in law enforcement, talking about this issue and having them join our coalition to put that bill forward is going to be really helpful, because we have to make sure we're engaging all those different stakeholders.
Okay, thank you so much. We have a couple more questions, and I know we have to wrap up, Amy, in just a minute, right? So I'd love to, I'm gonna put these questions out there, and maybe, Antonio, you can pick one that you can answer.
I have been answering some of them on the chat.
Oh, good.
But I'm going to focus on what's the main concern.
Yes.
Because I think that's something that in terms of legislation, I think that some of you already hear about the HEROES Act that passed in Congress. Now it's for vote in the Senate. And I think that right now it's key that we pressure our senators in Florida to approve this law, because it actually will include many farm workers. Because if you remember when the CARES Act passed, is when many people received checks as an incentive for their work, but many people were excluded. All the people that do not have social security numbers, that still pay taxes with the IT number, and even mixed families in which you might have a U.S. citizen, but also the wife or the husband doesn't have a social security number. All those families also were excluded, and that legislation actually will cover all the families. I think that's one step in the right direction. Fortunately, we have received a lot of donations of face masks, and many organizations have received now face masks, but also testing. And testing is an issue that is national-wide. It's a problem in general for the population, not just for farm workers. But in rural areas, testing is even more difficult. Most of the testing has been done in cities. The health department has put a lot of on-site testing places, but you need to have an ID. And that's, again, the problem of driver license. In 2001, until 2001, Florida was one of the states that allow undocumented people to get driver license. After 9/11 in 2001, there was legislation to prevent undocumented people to get driver license. But there was always the option, and now there's more states that actually have passed driver license regulations for that to happen. It is not unheard, it is happening. And that's another key to solve many issues for farm workers, because they are prevented for driving, they are preventing for opening bank accounts, they are preventing from even go to the doctor because they got scared. So I think that those two things are very key and very helpful.
I want to add some part of that. It is how help to the farm workers and undocumented. Most of the community, in Homestead, they have another organizations. They help to the farm workers, but they don't help to someone they don't have documents. That's why the Farmworker Association help to the specific people. They don't receive any benefits from the government or any other organization, because most of them, they don't have documents. That's why we have some places to get funds to help to them to pay some bills, like bill or rent or water. And our focus is specific for those persons. They don't receive anything. And most of them, some of them are working, it is true, but the rent in down here is so higher. And if some of them, they don't work, it is terribly for pay the rent because it's higher. That's why some families live together because they can't pay the rent by themselves. I think it's just that.
And Claudia, I put a link to the Farm Workers Direct Assistance GoFundMe. Is that some of the, is that the right link in the chat?
In the chat is the right link, I believe.
Okay, so I really would recommend that if people want to give direct assistance to Claudia and Antonio, that they will be giving this direct assistance to the workers. And that's a great place to make a contribution if you want to do something directly right now. And I just want to, I'm so sorry we're running out of time. This is something obviously we could talk about for hours and hours and hours. You know, I just want to thank you all for taking time, even though most of us are still home. It's very busy. People have kids to put to bed. People have, you know, lots of work to do that you can't do during the day because of other things. And it's strangely, we're home, but we're very busy anyway. And so I just want to thank you guys so much for joining us and taking time to ask questions and participate and being here. It means a lot to NCJW, and then I want to toss it back to Amy to maybe, and there's one more of the deep dives next week. I almost forgot. It is next Wednesday, June 3rd at 7 p.m. It's the same format with different guests. The topic is voter and civic engagement. Valencia Gunder of the Smile Trust and New Florida Majority will be our guest speaker, and she will probably bring some other guests as well. And I hope that you'll join us next week for that last deep dive of the series. Okay, now I'm tossing to you, Amy.
All right, thank you, Mara. And thank you so very much, Mara, for facilitating tonight. Thank you, Ida, Antonio, and Claudia for making this time for us. We're really looking forward to just continuing to build relationships with you and learn more about how we can support you. Your work is really important, and we want to support what you're doing. And Mara mentioned our program that's next Wednesday, a couple other programs that we have coming up. June 17th, Rabbi Joanne Loibin will be leading our Rosh Chodesh, a spiritual gathering for women, noon to 1, also on Zoom. And then we'll be partnering with Temple Beth Shalom and the League of Women Voters, Miami-Dade, on their candidates forum for the school board. That's going to be on Tuesday, June 23rd. Thank you again to our guest speakers this evening and Mara for facilitating, and everyone else. We'll be in touch soon about, you know, how we'll be diving even deeper and continuing this work. And the information that I sent out today and that Mara put in the chat includes ways to take action, those links that where you can give directly. You can support Flick by doing phone banking. What else did I miss? But anyway, it's all in that sheet that I sent out to you today, as well as Claudia, Antonio, and Ida's bios and information. Thank you again, everybody. Hope to see you next week for our final deep dive. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much, y'all. Thank you. Be safe,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone. Great job. Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Good job.
Thanks for joining us, Charo.
Thanks,
too.
Charo. Love you.
And Jenny and
Me too,
Mara. Everybody.
Thank you, guys. It's so good to see your faces.
Wonderful. Thank you.